The Supreme Court's recent 8-1 decision in United States v. Rahimi marks a pivotal moment for gun rights in America. This case, closely watched by legal experts and the public alike, has sparked a nationwide conversation about the balance between individual freedoms and collective security. In a rare show of consensus, the court upheld a federal law barring those under domestic violence restraining orders from possessing firearms. This law, designed to protect victims and prevent further harm, was challenged as a violation of the Second Amendment, but the justices found that public safety concerns can, in some cases, outweigh individual gun rights. This ruling draws a clear line, reminding Americans that even with expanded gun rights, there are limits when public safety is at stake. The decision sends a strong message that the government has a responsibility to protect vulnerable individuals from credible threats, especially in situations involving domestic violence. The decision follows the court's 2022 Bruin ruling, which set a strict history and tradition test for gun laws. However, Rahimi demonstrates that the court is willing to carve out exceptions for credible threats to public safety, showing a nuanced approach to interpreting the Constitution in modern times. By affirming the government's authority to disarm those deemed dangerous, the court signaled that the Second Amendment is not absolute. This means that while Americans have a right to bear arms, that right can be restricted when there is a demonstrated risk to others. Chief Justice Roberts, writing for the majority, emphasized that history supports disarming individuals who are not responsible, law-abiding citizens. He pointed to long-standing traditions in American law that allow for certain restrictions, especially when someone poses a clear danger to others. The ruling brings clarity to a legal landscape muddied by conflicting lower court decisions after Bruin. For judges, lawyers, and lawmakers, this decision provides much-needed guidance on how to balance constitutional rights with urgent safety concerns. While gun safety advocates see this as a win, the court left open many questions about the future boundaries of gun rights. The decision is a step forward for those seeking stronger protections, but it also highlights the ongoing debate over how far the government can go in regulating firearms. Across the country, legal analysts and citizens alike are now watching closely to see how this decision will influence future cases and legislation. The ruling is expected to shape debates in Congress and state legislatures for years to come. Justice Kavanaugh noted that the court's work on the Second Amendment is just beginning, hinting at more battles ahead. As the nation continues to grapple with gun violence and constitutional rights, the Supreme Court's decisions will remain at the center of this critical national conversation. The Rahimi case centers on Zaki Rahimi, a Texas man who was placed under a domestic violence restraining order after assaulting his ex-girlfriend. The restraining order was meant to protect his former partner and her child, reflecting the seriousness of the threat he posed. But Rahimi's actions didn't stop there. He later fired a gun at a bystander during a public altercation, escalating the situation and drawing further attention from law enforcement. This incident was just one in a series of violent episodes that would soon bring Rahimi into the national spotlight. Despite the protective order, Rahimi was involved in multiple shootings over several months. These repeated violations led to his indictment under a federal law that bans people under domestic violence restraining orders from possessing firearms, a law designed to prevent further harm and protect potential victims. Rahimi's legal team challenged the indictment, arguing that the federal gun ban violated his Second Amendment rights. They leaned heavily on the Supreme Court's recent Bruin decision, which emphasized the need for gun regulations to have clear historical roots. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with Rahimi, striking down the law as unconstitutional. This surprising decision sent shockwaves through the legal community and forced the Supreme Court to step in and review the case. In response, the government presented extensive evidence of Rahimi's violent behavior, arguing that he was precisely the kind of individual Congress intended to disarm with this law. They stressed the importance of protecting victims and preventing future violence. Ultimately, the Supreme Court reversed the Fifth Circuit's decision. The justices held that the government does have the authority to disarm individuals who have been found by a court to be dangerous, especially in cases involving domestic violence. Rather than demanding an exact historical match for the law, the court relied on the broader principle that society has long recognized the need to disarm those who pose a threat to public safety. This approach allowed the court to preserve the federal domestic violence gun ban, while also demonstrating that the Bruin framework can be interpreted with some flexibility to address modern threats. The Rahimi case underscored the Supreme Court's willingness to prioritize public safety and the protection of vulnerable individuals over a rigid, literal reading of historical precedent. While the decision leaves the door open for future legal challenges and debates over the scope of gun rights, for now, the law stands as a safeguard for those at risk of domestic violence. To truly grasp the impact of the Rahimi case, we need to trace the Supreme Court's evolving interpretation of the Second Amendment, a journey that has shaped American law and society for generations. For centuries, the right to bear arms was closely linked to service in a well-regulated militia. This collective understanding persisted from the nation's founding through much of its history, reflecting the early American experience and fears of standing armies. But in 2008, the Supreme Court's landmark decision in District of Columbia versus Heller dramatically shifted the legal landscape. Heller recognized for the first time that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to own firearms for self-defense within the home. However, the court also made clear that this right was not unlimited, leaving room for certain restrictions and regulations. After Heller, lower courts struggled to apply the ruling, leading to a patchwork of inconsistent standards across the country. This confusion persisted until 2022, when the Supreme Court decided New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruen. Bruen established a new, much stricter history and tradition test for evaluating gun laws, requiring courts to look for historical analogs to justify modern regulations. The Bruen decision forced judges to dig deep into the past, searching for historical precedents to support or strike down contemporary gun regulations. This approach sparked a wave of legal challenges, as courts and lawmakers struggled to interpret what counted as a valid historical analog, leading to widespread uncertainty and debate. The Rahimi case quickly emerged as the first major test of Bruen's limits, putting the new standard under intense scrutiny and national attention. In an 8-1 ruling, the Supreme Court clarified that the history and tradition test is not absolute. The justices found that broad historical principles, such as protecting public safety, can justify modern gun laws, even if there isn't a perfect historical match. This decision signals a more pragmatic approach from the court, suggesting that the Second Amendment does not block all common-sense gun regulations. Instead, it allows for a balance between individual rights and the government's responsibility to protect its citizens. The court's willingness to adapt its standards when public safety is at risk marks a significant development in Second Amendment jurisprudence and hints at a more flexible future. As a result, the stage is now set for future debates and legal battles over just how far gun rights extend, and where the line should be drawn to keep Americans safe. United States v. Rahimi pitted public safety against constitutional rights. The government argued that temporarily disarming those under restraining orders is a targeted, life-saving measure rooted in historical tradition. They pointed to past laws disarming dangerous or untrustworthy individuals, even if the categories have changed. Rahimi's attorneys countered that the Second Amendment is a fundamental right, and that no founding-era law specifically disarmed those accused of domestic violence. They warned that upholding the law could set a precedent for broader disarmament based on subjective judgments. The case became a test of whether the court would stick to a strict historical standard or allow for modern public safety concerns. Justice Clarence Thomas stood alone in dissent, holding firm to his strict reading of the Second Amendment. He argued the majority diluted the Bruen standard by allowing a law without a direct historical analog. For Thomas, only those convicted of crimes or rebellion could be disarmed, not those under civil restraining orders. He warned that the majority's flexible approach could justify almost any gun regulation, undermining the Second Amendment. Thomas's dissent highlights a deep divide on the court over how strictly to interpret gun rights. The Rahimi decision is just one chapter in the ongoing battle over gun laws. Major issues, like state bans on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, are working their way to the Supreme Court. The justices recently declined to hear challenges to such bans, but the issue is far from settled. Another looming case involves gun rights and drug use, as courts grapple with whether habitual marijuana users can be barred from owning firearms. Lower courts are also split on age restrictions, sensitive places, and waiting periods for gun purchases. The legal confusion ensures the Supreme Court will revisit these questions soon. the next few years will be critical in defining the true scope of the Second Amendment. The Supreme Court's rulings on gun rights have real consequences for public safety and personal freedom. Rahimi clarified that the Second Amendment doesn't shield dangerous individuals from temporary disarmament, but left many questions unresolved. The fate of assault weapon bans, magazine limits, and gun rights for drug users remains uncertain. As lower courts issue conflicting decisions, the need for Supreme Court guidance grows. The coming years will shape the balance between individual rights and collective safety. The court's evolving approach will influence lawmakers, law enforcement, and every American. The next chapter in the story of the Second Amendment is still being written,